All systems go. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Great to see so many people here. My name's Greg Pryor. I'm somewhat out of my comfort zone here amongst the literary crowd. I'm a visual artist, and I've been very surprised. I've been invited to come and be your MC tonight, but very happy to. Just before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we're meeting on Wajak Noongar Budja tonight, the land of the Wajak Noongar people, whose sovereignty of the land was never ceded, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And it's particularly a privilege to be meeting for this event on a land that's so inscribed with oral histories, oral stories, to be here to hear Alan read from his latest book, Near Believing. So, a little bit of context. Just before I go into that, housekeeping. Could you all please just check your mobile phones to make sure that they're on silent? For those, I think quite a few of you have gravitated to the grazing tables down the back there, where there's some food, drinks, obviously. The bathrooms are through the door at the back. You go through the door, through the dining area just to your left. And I think that's about it for the housekeeping. So, how did I end up being here? In 1987, I was a very naive young artist who had never seen snow, and I was in Paris, having landed unexpectedly a residency through the Visual Arts Board of the Australian Council to live and work in Paris at the Cité Internationale des Arts. Some of you might know it or have stayed there. Smack bang in the middle of Paris, right opposite the Ile Saint-Louis and the Pompeii. And as I said, I was rather naive, and I've been there only about a week or two in one of the older parts of the Cité. It houses, for those that don't know, it's artists from all over the world of all different disciplines, just over 400 artists, I think, so it's quite an amazing complex. And I was in one of the older parts of the Cité, just for temporarily, because I was being moved into a brand new annex, and I had just moved into the new studio, which really smelled new. You smell all the building materials, the furniture was still wrapped in plastic, etc. And I'd been there just 2 or 3 days, and it's a particularly cold winter in Paris that year. And the windows had thick curtains in front of them, double glazed, of course. So it was a hermetically sealed studio, I felt, coming from Australia, and I wasn't used to being cocooned so much. But this particular evening, that cocoon seemed even more silent. And it was about 7, 8 o'clock at night, and I pulled back the curtains and looked outside, and snow was falling. And I was, as I said, the young, naive artist, and I went, very amazed. I quickly grabbed an empty glass jar I had on the table. I opened the window, put the glass jar out to catch some snowflakes, and there was a knock on the door. I didn't know anybody in Paris, and I was quite startled at this significant moment of seeing snow for the first time and capturing some snowflakes. Quickly put the jar down, went to the door, opened it, and a man walked straight into the studio without announcing who he was, but I now know is the author of the book we're launching tonight. And as if he knew about the poignancy of this moment, he immediately went to the curtains and opened the curtains and looked out the window suspiciously. And he looked around the studio, didn't look at me, and then almost as an afterthought, turned his head up and said, "I'm Alan, I'm a writer from Australia. I need to talk to you." And I was still somewhat taken aback by this entry, but look, I forget what transpired after that. A short thing, I think you said, Alan, that you had been to the concierge and asked, "Where are the Australians?" As if maybe something about how does an Australian who's never been out of Australia and never seen snow, how might they be faring at this moment? Anyway, I can't quite remember what we talked about, but Alan left, and by that point the snow had melted in the glass, and I got out my watercolours and I made a little watercolour of that encounter with Alan Wearne. So it was preserved for posterity. And in being the MC here tonight, and reading through Near Believing, I kept thinking of that first encounter and the strange choreography that transpired in that studio in Paris, and was continually sort of reminded of it as I was reading Alan's work. So thanks for the invitation, Alan, to come and contribute tonight. And so my next task is to introduce another dear friend from going back even further than 1987. We're going back to the 1970s, which, having discussed with Urata recently, is a very significant time also in our lives. And so Urata Sasnaitis and I both studied art at RMIT in the late 1970s, where we first met. And since then, our paths have gone in slightly different directions. Urata taking up more with a literary trajectory as I followed art. And our paths unexpectedly at different points of the way. And so this configuration of Alan and Urata and I meeting together with this wonderful event is, it's really special. Urata's had a long association with the literary world, and I was really thrilled to reconnect with Urata 10, 12 years ago when she came to WA, and even more thrilled when I found out recently that she received her doctorate from UWA, and I think that's a fantastic achievement. Yes, I think so. And as I said, Urata's currently now trying to get her first novel, Sunland, published to the right publisher, so she's on another trajectory there. And just to bring Paris back into it, what do people do when they get a PhD? They take off and travel and start working on the next one, and Urata's heading off to Paris, Venice, Lithuania, just really demanding things very shortly. So, well, not tonight, maybe in a few weeks. But the thing I wanted to acknowledge about introducing Urata, which I think sits right up the top of the queue in some ways, is that Urata ran a bookshop. And she ran a bookshop for 19 years in Wearne in Melbourne, Greville Street Bookstore, and I think that selfless dedication in the support of literature has guaranteed you a spot in literary heaven. And so, without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Urata Sasnaitis to open Alan's book, Near Believing.
Okay, right? Yeah. Okay, so I brought this along to prove to everyone that I've really carefully read the book, okay? And when I was doing my PhD, I was really famous for being awarded Stick It Note of the Year award. So thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Greg, for that amazing speech. I don't have that facility, and I'm just going to read. Otherwise, I'll get all bumbly and mumbly. So we're here tonight, obviously, to celebrate the publication of Near Believing, a selection of Alan's monologues and narratives that go back to 1967. To paraphrase his own words, you can imagine what the publication of 5 decades of work means to the author. For the reader, Near Believing is a timely opportunity to revisit or to visit for the first time and hopefully be inspired to pursue the work of one of Australia's foremost poets. I was about to say illustrious, but I could imagine Alan grimacing in the corner. Someone who was a little braver than I, critic Peter Duell, called him a one-off, better than our novelists at evoking time and place. Peter Craven wrote, "Wearne is like no one else in Australian poetry," and likened his style to nothing on earth. That's pretty good. Most recently, Geoffrey Lehman, in his review of Near Believing for The Australian, called Alan the greatest taxidermist of Australian life, which made me laugh too. I could just see Alan bent over the table, gutting and stuffing the carcass of Australia. Perhaps taxonomist would have been more appropriate, sorting, classifying, and satirising the complexities of social interaction. Alan gives voice to a gamut of characters, from snobs and bogans to pedophiles and priests, drug lords and petty crims to ordinary suburban housewives. Characters derived from newspaper articles and recognisable public figures, others loosely based on friends, probably family as well, and acquaintances. I say beware, lest you find yourself at the mercy of some poet's disordered imagination. Regardless of how we label him, Alan is a master of the extended poetic narrative, of characterisation and conversation, of the rhythms and rhymes of traditional poetic forms, from the sonnet to the villanelle, you name it. For this facility, Alan credits his companions since youth, a mate called Geoffrey Chaucer, another chap from Stratford-upon-Avon, and many others too numerous to mention. In her introduction to Near Believing, editor Michelle Borsey provides a much more extensive analysis of Alan's poetic development and achievements. But what actually struck me most in reading Near Believing was the astonishing sense of the poet having arrived on the scene fully formed. I said as much to Alan's partner, Annie English, to whom the book is dedicated. She agreed. And Chris Hemmensley, another Melbourne poet, some might know him from Collected Works Bookshop, also agreed. In fact, Chris remembered clearly the 3 Monash uni lads, Alan, Laurie Duggan and John A. Scott, arriving at La Mama in the late 60s, already knowing exactly what they were about. He also retains an image of Alan, like AC/DC's Angus Young, there's the Perth connection, in shorts. How's that? So he told me today. Anyway, you only have to read St. Bartholomew Remembers Jesus Christ as an Athlete written when Alan was 17, 18?
One day before my 19th birthday.
18. And it's all there. Well, nearly 19, okay. Alan's confidence in transposing historical, or in this case, biblical material to a contemporary context, his ear for the cadences of vernacular speech, and of course, his wry humour. It should come as no surprise that half of Alan's characters are women, or that the cover of Near Believing should feature a detail from Jenny Watson's delicious painting of a scrappy redhead surveilling herself in the mirror. Alan thinks that was inspired by the Sue Dobson character from The Night Markets. As Alan notes, women do comprise 50% of the population, and as far as identity politics or cultural appropriation is concerned, he maintains that we'd be condemned to write only about our boring selves were we prohibited from imagining ourselves into the lives of others. What is more surprising for an old white bloke is the compassion and empathy with which he conceives of women's interior lives, their tales of pairing and unpairing, of compromise, domestic boredom, abuse. In his verse novels, the award-winning Night Markets and The Lovemakers, which was published in 2 volumes in Australia, Saying All the Great Sexy Things in 2001, and Money and Nothing in 2004. Dramatic impetus is derived from multiple viewpoints, from judicious interjections and digressions that reveal the characters' inner workings and drive the narrative forward or around, and from telling insights that are so casually inserted in the text you could miss them if you weren't paying attention. Peter Rose, another friend, poet and editor of Australian Book Review, once remarked that relationships are a grand tussle. In Sue Dobson's voice, Alan admits his addiction to that most fascinating thing in the world. All the skirmishes, battles, truces, treaties, all the incongruous attrition of civil war and reconstruction as, between flare-ups, we resume some spongy armistice. Terrific stuff. Unfortunately, I can't give full rein to Sue Dobson's monologue, Climbing Up the Ladder of Love, which is in Near Believing, or we'd be here all night. We wouldn't want that. They'd kick us out anyway. But in a nod to our recent change of federal government, I just want to briefly quote Sue, quoting her lover, former Liberal Party Minister John McTaggart, in an interview with a journalist called Clyde. So Sue says, John says, "When problems loom, we'll confront that loom. I'm sure you'll see more than a mere protest vote against all established forces, Clive. Quote, ordinary Australians don't have to be poked, prodded into action this time round, Clive," unquote. The interviewer nodded. The politics of politicking and the politics of relationships go hand in hand in this 17-page tour de force of rhyming couplets. And from Lovemakers, again, just almost chosen at random, the 26 sonnet sequence called Roger, or of Love and Anger, details the lives of Barb and Roger Heath, from happy beginnings through Barb's several infidelities to the bitter end, all in conversation, or generally in conversation with Roger's shrink. In number 10, Games, we're given this to ponder. Each lover coaches for the next. Beyond each game lies art. These are the way you have relationships. I think it's great. Moving straight on to number 21, love, called just love, goes in for the kill, insisting on love against evidence to the contrary, praying that what went between them was indeed this thing called love. I'll read the whole thing. I probably shouldn't actually. Because I really want to get on to they came to Moorabbin. Anyway, but hate is never the risk love is, and I love. There are those who slice to the quick of it, shine from the thick of it, demand, not even the odd kid glove, nothing but the barge pole option, they're allowed. My life has just one law. Somehow I must keep this faith. She took me and I her on trust, till we more than lashed that braying crowd predicting our demise. We made this our family and its home. It has to have been love. What else frees you from errors you're meant to commit? Oh, my wife might sling me cheek, and I tolerate this as I always will the foam of barb. But she knows I'll never get conned by the terrors of failure, seduced by their bravado and mistake. Of his more recent poems, They Came to Moorabbin is one of my favourites. I had the misfortune of being a teenager in Moorabbin in the 1970s. Although this poem is set in the 1950s, the era of Menzies and the 1956 Olympic Games, somehow I still really relate to it. It's the story of put upon Iris and her pompous, demanding, ultimately insecure husband Keith and their 3 boys. Of Iris, or in Iris's voice, Alan wrote, and being adaptable, Iris could adjust. That's what she knew Keith liked in her. As his plans became their post-war plans, and the post-war plans turned into opinions, his opinions, then reactions, then demands, particularly demands. With those few lines, Alan sets up the 2 main characters and their relationship, and introduces, a few lines later, the spoke in their wheel, the widow Nancy Bliss, not named Bliss for nothing. An acquaintance Iris recognises from Cipher. And with that single word, reference to her war work, Cipher, as in being in the Cipher department, Alan indicates that Iris is not the numbskull her husband makes her out to be. I think these days we'd call Keith's behaviour gaslighting. Or maybe the key is to actually talking to the top of it. Okay, I think I finally got it. We're nearly over. Anyway, they bump into Nance. Oh, I have got it. You should have told me. They bump into Nance at Half Moon Bay and a friendship of sorts develops. The death of Nance's diplomat husband Tony has left her stranded in Moorabbin with 4 kids. Might as well be Mars as far as Nance is concerned. I remember that feeling. 10 years out there was enough to send me scuttling to Paran, as we say in Melbourne, at the earliest opportunity. Keith, of course, enjoys being the handy man in Nance's life, though she can't stand the way he calls her toots. It's enough to make your skin crawl. And this is a really interesting sequence. Then Keith started visiting weekdays, the taxes and what else, telling toots she looked like Lauren Bacall, which was nice. I'm no June Allison, she mock confessed, nor Mitzi Gaynor, even less. True, Kay Kendall might have been auditioned, but with her strong, worldly, wise eyes, Betty McCall sounded fine. And why not, she riffed, Celeste Home or Glynis Johns for Iris? And if you want a star for Tony, think Trevor Howard. All that officer's necessity to play it correct with just a hellraiser's touch. Then possibly not. Probably not. Till one day, just as surely, never. I loved him, nursed and loved him, and she would never love and nurse another, since Nance loathed dying, Tony's dying, and sometimes even him for dying. Again, with a few well-placed film star names, Alan evokes the period and Keith's creepiness. Keith, of course, makes a play for Nance, but she sees right through him. If she really took him on, Nance wonders, if she called him out on the way he speaks to Iris, who would suffer? Iris, of course. The friendship lingers on another 10 years or so until it peters out in the annual women's ritual of greeting cards. Sure, many of us know that one. Oh, I don't. That ends with Iris's death. Keith vanishes from the scene with some aging bowling club girlfriend no one guessed he had. And Nance ends in the way of so many of Alan's narratives, with a sting in the tale of life on a poignant note. With or without Mr. Menzies, Tony has been stored away and Nance is telling her family, "Let me leave Moorabbin, leave it to the Martians," which she does, and how she ends, tubed up for emphysema, a granny in a granny flat out the back of her daughters. I should probably stop here, but I just wanted to finish by quoting the words of a young poet barely 21. He said, "Like any honest manufacturer, the poet must have the consumer in mind or at heart. He might not give them what they want, but he should give what he thinks is in their best interests, whether by shocking the reader into submission or more underhand methods. He must try to establish a broad affinity with readers who are to come. Readers need not be rolling on the floor in a laughing fit. If the poem never bores and constantly keeps the reader's wits on edge, then it could be said that the poem is enjoyable." Alan wrote that statement for the Australian Poetry Now anthology edited by Thomas Shapcott and published in 1970, a statement that I think holds true today as undoubtedly it did then. You won't find much of an I poet, a confessional poet in this volume, except in perhaps a cameo appearance as a character in Operation Henriksen, a Wearne, who you needn't believe because he's just making it up, a Wearne who loves annoying. What you will find here is plenty to enjoy, even a laugh or two, and enough meat to satisfy the most voracious appetite. And on that note, I declare Near Believing well and truly launched. Congratulations to Wearne. Here's to you. I'll let him get on with the reading.
Okay, good to juggle a few things. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. I particularly wish to thank those people that I've never met before. We got a number of RSVPs from people that who are they? And I was so pleased to know that it still thrills me to meet people who are aware of my work or are intrigued to wonder what it is. That's something that I doubt that a popular novelist could say, that they're thrilled, these people that don't know me. And I do think, in particular, everyone for coming, but those people in particular, and I've been meeting them tonight. I wish to thank a few people here. Two people aren't here at the moment. That's the publisher, David Musgrave, who has... I publish books myself. I've published 14 over the course of about a decade. He's published about 33 this year, or last year or something. An incredibly professional sort of attitude that he has. This doesn't mean that someone who's more of an amateur can't do it, as I have done it in the past, but I've learned a lot from watching David in action as a publisher. The other person I wish to thank in this volume, I suppose, is the editor, the woman who chose a lot of the poems, so there was plenty of give and take with me, but also wrote the introduction, Michelle Borzi. I think she deserves to be known. I thank Gregory and Urata, my co-stars for this evening, for Gregory's anecdotes, or anecdote. I don't remember that time in Paris, but I do remember you being there. And certainly Urata's take on the Moorabbin story. I'm trying to think of what the Perth equivalent for Moorabbin is. The poem is set at a time when Melbourne was the population of what Perth is now, which is about 60 years ago, say. And it would be intriguing to know, though, that kind of post-war suburb. We didn't come from Moorabbinite, but we did journey there as a family. David would remember that. And we wish to thank the crew here, Alan, of course, and Annie, who have been the producers of this evening. First met Annie at a poetry reading in a bookshop. It's true. I won't be reading from the large poems. I do tend to write these large-scale works and have a tendency to do that, but I will, because as she rightly says, Urata rightly said, we'd be here all night if I started reciting some of them. I will read a number of shorter pieces, monologues. The first one comes from the early 70s. It's called Warburton 1910. Warburton is a small town in the hills east of Melbourne. I'm imagining this young woman in the Edwardian era going on a honeymoon. Sarah, she's writing a letter. Sarah, of us in our chase, the photograph shows Colin and I turning a bend towards the ferns. We'll send it soon. Introduced, fussed over, we still laugh as newlyweds. The other guests, one's a baronet, take turns as mama and papa. You babes, so young. Often it felt unlikely I was married. After luncheon, Mr. McCracken took us out in the motor. Where to, missus, he asked. When that made feelings quite important, this high-toned lady, me, looked out over the mountains, miles of fern gully, waterfall, and to the prettiest place you know, I replied. If raining, we never read, but pretend it's a log cabin, all for us. Yet, from the veranda, we saw this stupid boy who shied a bird from a tree. I slipped hand into my husband's, watching the willful child tread the damp lawn, slingshot aimed and smiling. In writing in a female voice, I've never felt that I had to do it. It just seemed sort of a natural thing to do. Sometimes one could just step back and So, my God, written in a female voice. But that was years later. There are certain areas, I'm sure, of women's life that I would not remotely touch as a poet from a first-person point of view. I think that would just be... I don't think a man should be able to do that, but I mean, there's plenty of scope to sort of have women as narrators, as speakers of monologues. I suppose it is one of my obsessions, trying to sort of work out the play between men and women. I suppose it's been like that throughout all my, at least since adolescence, trying to work it out. But I think it does require a solid amount of imagination to be able to work that out, see what you can come up with. But I do have other obsessions. And as was mentioned recently, there was the current federal election, and lots of my poetry, as Wearne has indicated with the Sue Dobson piece, a lot of the poetry ends up being about Australian politics. I think of federal parliament as basically the face of this country, how this country presents itself to the world, which changes over time. Under the previous regime, of course, it presented this hyper-Pentecostal view of the world to the world. Fair enough, I suppose, a good point. But now with a foreign minister who's a Chinese lesbian, that's pretty amazing. No, I think it's... What's that?
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's not bad, is it? I mean, at all. I think it's fabulous. But I do have this certain obsessions, one of which is Australian politics. There was a series of poems I wrote inspired by popular Australian songs. There's 35 of them, a number of which have been included in this volume. And this popular Australian song is it comes from 1972, and it's the It's Time song. Those of you may remember the It's Time campaign. You can see the It's Time song on the YouTube. It's quite extraordinary. Bobby Lim and other celebrities singing the It's Time song. And this one here is a poem about the It's Time song. Well, inspired by the It's Time song. There's a reference here to Billy Big Ears, which was a rather silly title for the Liberal Prime Minister Billy McMahon. I don't think he really deserved it, but well, he deserved a few things, but not that. Anyhow, it's time. Democracy, face it, cannot be denied, for I've shared my 3 hours at the How to Votes with this man around my age from the other side, and his arch down pat, patent young lib quotes. Polls, forget 'em, this'll be down to the wire. He nods, the eyes narrow, he strokes the jaw. A silly prick who knows I'm holding fire on Billy Big Ears, conscription and the war. But look, I turn conciliator, we won't seize power for how many years? 23? And he's nodding. Yeah. Both shifts have drifted to the concession now. I'll grant this much. You got a great song there. It's time. Why didn't we think of that? Yeah. But in your case, it'd be time for what? On the road, all these popular songs are not necessarily top 40 tunes from my youth. They go back to the 19th century. They stop around 1980. After that, I've basically got not much interest in popular Australian wedding popular music, but up to about 1980. And one of the earlier ones by Jack O'Hagan, On the Road to Gundagai. There's a track winding back. You know that one? Well, it's a great sing-along song. Family having a sing-along in a car, going on a Sunday drive in the 1950s. Unlike myself, Bruce and David, these Janet, Carol and Margie, they're girls with Mum and Dad, and they're doubtless singing On the Road to Gundagai. After church, the drive, the sing-song, Dad in tenor mode winds the Vauxhall down Mount Dandenong Road. Lulled, Mum's glad these patterns still keep, Janet reading, Carol pulling faces, Margie asleep, till beyond such certainties each arrives, stride, stroll or stumbling through their lives out of these soul on sleeve days with what was, is, might be something to believe. So Dad dies, Mum remarries and shifts, Janet lectures, Carol designs, Margie drifts. Oh, millstone, lodestar, that time of fates, a Sunday in the car. Behold your future, it's by extension splendour. Welcome, ladies, to the age of gender. Where we didn't come from, we came from basically an area where the major schools were high schools or their Roman Catholic equivalents, CBCs and the like. We knew that private schools were elsewhere in town, and I had friends who ended up going there post primary school, and later on I met plenty of people who'd gone to that world. We were sort of looking over that world. We were aware that it was there. And in this one here, I try to call The World of Our Own, which of course was a Seekers song. And the Seekers were sort of like, I suppose, the well-bred sort of equivalent of pop music at that time, helped along by Judith Durham's great voice. And The World of Our Own, and I sort of think of The World of Our Own as try to capture that upper middle class world, which was perhaps centred on a street called Monomeath Avenue in Canterbury in Melbourne. And Monomeath Avenue, whose most famous people that lived there were the Victorian Premier, later the Premier Rupert Hamer, but even more fabulously Mr. and Mrs. Andrew Peacock of the time. They lived in Monomeath Avenue. And I can imagine this man who's reciting this poem in a world of his own. This is not my world, but it's a world I could imagine, shall we say. There's a reference here to Wearne, where a lot of those people had holiday houses down the western coast of Victoria. If they were really rich, of course, they would have gone down to Portsea. And this is set in 1967, which was the year that Harold Holt went into the ocean and was never seen again. The Prime Minister, Harold Holt. A World of Our Own. Will Claire attend the boat race dance? Have I a pre-selection chance? In my study, Nigel twitched. It's Lucy, Dad. We must get hitched. And I, to ease us from this jolt, poured both a treble single malt. Name the ratio. What's the blend of house guests for a lawn weekend? But Fleur's a gem since up she musters professors, senators, Messrs Justice, whilst life improves upon all right, if I can make an old boy's night. Angus and Polly were around that Sunday when the PM drowned. I have obsessions. The that tackled. It's not just suburbia. I don't think I've ever been bored in suburbia. That's probably one of the reasons why I stayed connected with that part of Melbourne for so long, was that it fascinated me. Don't ask me why, but it did. I can't give a real explanation for that. But I have other obsessions. I think the underworld, you can stumble on things in the underworld that you read about. For example, there's a poem here based on I'm not going to read it, but there's a poem in this book based on Blue Murder, that television series from the 1990s based on the relationship between Roger Rogerson and Arthur Neddy Smith in Sydney. I found that fascinating things to look at. But one of the big ones that fascinated me was the Mr. Asia drug syndicate. Admittedly, that was a New Zealand-based operation, but I transposed it into a thing called Nothing But Thunder, featuring an invented Australian drug lord called Kevin Joy. And I was just sort of obsessed by the Mr. Asia drug syndicate and all aspects of that tale. Again, don't ask me exactly why. Certainly the fact that, what's his name? What's the name of the... It's here, it's coming. Terry Clark, the head of the Mr. Asia drug syndicate, and his affair with the young lady barrister, young woman barrister, certainly that kicked on the story, didn't it? And I was sort of obsessed by it down the years. And I wrote a poem in a series of poems set in, which is not one of the popular song poems, a thing called Neutral Bay, which was a suburb of Sydney where some of the drug couriers hung out in an apartment for a while. And I invented a speaker who was a courier for the Mr. Asia drug syndicate, because it was still obsessing me, trying to work it out. Neutral Bay. The speaker was a courier for the Mr. Asia drug syndicate. I'd get in from the airport after midnight and wait a day till someone came around and loaded me and made me, thanks sweetheart, $15,000 richer. Then I'd hardly be noticed. Not till Alison called, or Kay, and we went off to buy all these incredible clothes. I knew of 2 apartments, ours and theirs. Theirs a place where you went in, saw the organisation dropping by to pick up the stuff, and you went out. What did I think I was? Not old enough to break the law? What law? By then the only law I had to keep was getting away with knowing Terry Clark. So yes, I was old enough. I did it often enough, and whoever I was, I just needed my identity, even if I didn't need an identity. I was smart and waiting about on the fringes of Terry Clark's banal life, hardly knew what I did, except that I was that damn special. Giving myself a week away from spending, I caught a light aircraft back to the folks, stayed up to near midnight, doing gossip with Mum. Of course, someone's kid was into drugs, always someone's kid and always drugs. And I thought, who knows what the organisation's doing right now? Cutting, grinding and packing, delivering, collecting and waiting. And how I never wanted to feel damn special again. But thanks a lot, sweetheart. Of course I did. So I have these rogues galleries. I've written about other things that have obsessed me. The Nugan Hand Bank, that great money launderer of the 1970s, the Bogle Chandler mystery of the 1960s. They're included in this volume. I will finish this series of poems with a somewhat sordid, not sordid, but it's a, no, it's not the right word. a somewhat entertainingly sordid poem, shall we say. Yeah, we'll say that. We'll say that. It's called Bad Habits, which is another popular song. You remember that one by Billy Field? Yeah. When I get the urge, I just got to splurge. And this is a Bad Habits. The speaker is, how do I describe it up the back? I think it's probably best to just it's probably best to sort of say, hours before he heads off on an early morning flight to the United States, a businessman has an escort visit his hotel room. She brings around a few drugs. Okay. What page is it? 148. You're right. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Bad Habits. It's got a quote from the great 19th century sonnet sequence Modern Love by George Meredith. I take the hap of all my deeds. 2:50, what? The night's a kickback stage. And if I'm the man heading to LAX, you must be Madison, monument to your sex, sweet, groomed, worldly, and my daughter's age, with cute white slithers of kathwack, kathwack, for hours of bug-eyed frenzy, till the chop. And Ken, I'm hearing, reckon we ought to stop or name us a worse place for your heart attack. But bad and badder habits hunt in packs. If your urge says go, so you splurge your dough, oh, ain't that par for one horny CEO who craves you as his item to the max. Unless, well, hardly, you've turned out a narc. IQ at 6 with trans-Pacific rabble. Till then, Madison, you straddle, I babble. Bloodshot, out-staring fox sports in the dark. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I do the amount of people that are here, and there were a few people that couldn't make it for good reasons. I do think that. I mean, it's those I know and those that I'm about to get to know. And I think we'll say it like that. So, books are there. I can sign them. Alan can sell them. Okay, there'll be a, so enjoy it. Eat up, drink up.